led to the end of the Ottoman Empire and to the formation of the modern Republic of Turkey. Today I will tell you what I know about them and take you sort of in a whirlwind historical journey to the time, place, community, and culture of which they were a part. You see, in the Izmir dialect of Ladino, we say papu for grandfather. In other places, they say nonna. So it's those papus. Or, in my day, we used to call them grandpapa. Those grandpapas. Let's see. Here are their pictures. Okay, is this it? Oh. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you. This is their pictures. I think pictures, as they say 1,000 words. But I think that the impression that you get will be partially correct and partially not, as you will see. They were not the same age. One was older. Can you guess which one? I think their pictures are emblematic of the transition or the transitional era in which they lived. One, as you see, is more Ottoman looking, Turkish with the fez, and the other one very European looking. The one with the long robe, the jubbe as we say, is my paternal grandfather. He dressed the Turkish way his whole life. And this is the only image we have of him. He was a very religious person and believed in the literal application of the commandment not to make graven images. So he never had a photograph taken of him. This one, I was told, this one is a big drawing, which always hung in our house. And I was told that a neighbor of his had snapped a photograph of him surreptitiously and then drew the image and presented it to him. My father took it. It hung in a very ornate frame in our house. My grandfather, Salomon, my maternal grandfather, always dressed he was a very spiffy dresser all the time, and very immaculate dresser. He was younger. This picture was taken in 1927, as you see. However, we can look up. Okay, let's go there. This is a map just to show you the location of Izmir. This is where we lived. This is where I'm from. The old name of the city was Smyrna. It's the Greek name. And you can see the location. This map is actually a 1922 map showing the loss of territories to Greece. And you will hear more about where it is. As you can see, it's a bay. And let's see if I can do this. This island here is Rhodes. And we're just across the sea, the Aegean Sea from Greece. That's this actually, right here. Am I showing it? Sorry. This area is the newer area of settlement at the time new, where we all lived. And here you see the old Jewish cemetery. Now my paternal grandfather lived elsewhere, but my maternal grandfather lived along the Cape up here. And so did we. We really don't know what year my grandparents were born, but he was obviously older. My father was 20 years older than my mother, so. And he died on December 1923, just about a month after, or less than a month, no, a little more than a month after the Turkish Republic was declared. So he never had to change clothes or his attire, as you can see. In the drawing, the artist put his signature. Can you tell what language that is? French. And smear is the French word for Izmir, Izmirna. And the date is January, 3rd of January, almost to the day, today, 100 and some years later, 104 years later. That's because, believe it or not, my grandfather had been a French citizen, and he spoke French. And he spoke other languages as well, including Turkish. I don't know much about my grandfather Salomon, although I knew him because he didn't die until 1954. And if you think that it's because he was so much younger that he dressed like that, this is a picture of his family in 1914. That's my mother there, the little girl, not the smallest, but the next one. And even in 1911, he dressed like that. So that tells you that in the Ottoman Empire in those days, there were people dressing in all kinds of ways, especially in Izmir, which was a very cosmopolitan city. And in fact, more than half of the population was not Muslim in those days. I took the period of time more or less when they were both alive, and that was so tumultuous and turbulent, really. Only really to tell you that I don't know much about how they fared in those times. But it's worth reviewing what was going on. We have the rule of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, which was really a despotic time. And in 1892, they had actually celebrated in Istanbul the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Sephardic Jews. In 1908, Abdul Hamid was deposed, and the Young Turk Revolution took place, which there was a sultan, but really it was a period, also a very difficult period, especially for non-Jews, because they started conscripting them into the army. Until that time, they just paid a tax and they were exempt. Before the Balkan Wars, actually there was an Italo-Turkish war, in which the Ottoman Empire lost the island of Rhodes. That's significant because Smyrna, located where it was, had, especially the Jewish community, had very close relations with the island of Rhodes and then with Salonika, which we saw on the map, but anyway. So that must have affected their lives somehow. And then, of course, the First World War. My grandfather lost his youngest son in that war, but not in the war per se. That's another story. In the really bad period of time, we've heard of the Armenian deportations. It was sort of related in a way, but that's another lecture. But a researcher friend of mine found the letter written by my grandfather, Samuel, searching for his son, sent to the British Council. Anyway, the Treaty of Sèvres was really the big loss of the Ottoman Empire. It pretty much spelled the end. And if you can see, it was partitioned. You can see the borders of modern Turkey and how it was partitioned. So that only the yellow part, it's not Turkey, the yellow part was really Turkey, was left to Turkey. And Izmir, or Smyrna, was given to the Greeks. The Greek army invaded the city and went on to occupy much of the western part of Turkey. And the war lasted until the 9th of September 1922. The Turks came back and regained Izmir. And after that, there was, a few days after that, a terrible, one of the worst urban fires in world history. You can look it up. You can see a picture of the city on fire and some of the remains. This is a picture of the Quay of Izmir, with all the Greeks having to leave. The Greeks comprise about almost half, really, of the population. They were the largest group that lived in Izmir. And here they are desperately looking for a way to flee. And this is before the fire. Finally, there was a Treaty of Lausanne at the end of the Turkish War of Independence with Mustafa Kemal being the president. And the caliphate, you know what the caliphate is, the caliph, the sultans used to be also the religious leaders, Islamic leaders. That was abolished. And my grandfather died shortly after. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the period, the Republican period. Just a few of the reforms brought about, which really impacted the Jewish community as well as everybody else. It was a series of all kinds of reforms. Political, legal, religious, cultural, social, and economic changes implemented during the leadership of Atatürk and made presidents by what we know today as the Republic of Turkey. Notice that the Sunday was adopted as a legal weekly holiday. What do you think it was before? Friday. And also the significant here is the law of surnames. Muslims did not have surnames. Jews always did. However, upon this law, many Jewish people adopted the Turkish last names. Not in Izmir so much, but in Istanbul, a lot of Jewish people took on Turkish last names. But it wasn't compulsory because we already had last names. But Turks had to line up and make up the family names. Often brothers had different names. Another thing was the millet system. Do you know what that is? In the Ottoman Empire, because it was so vast and it was mostly non-Muslim, each ethnic group had semi-autonomy. This was called the millet or nation system. So, like the Jews had their own courts and schools and hospitals and courts, especially. You didn't have to go to the Turkish courts. That's what's called the millet system. That's in fact how Ladino survived all these years. People like to say that it was because of the Jews' nostalgia for Spain. But the fact is that it was the language of the Jews. Each ethnic group was free to have a national language. And the Jews, the Sephardic Jews who had arrived were the majority of the Jews. Don't think that there were only Sephardic Jews in the Ottoman Empire, because there were Ashkenazic, there were Romaniot, Arabic, all kinds of Jews there. But when the Sephardic Jews came 1492 and after, they totally overwhelmed most of the local Jews, and also the ones that came later from the Ashkenazic European world, so that everybody learned to speak Judeo-Spanish and Ladino. And that was the Jewish language, and the Turks called it Yahudije, which means Jewish. In fact, some Jewish people called it Judeo, which means. I told you that my grandfather Samuel's son, Abraham, he was not conscripted actually, but he disappeared. And my grandfather, I remember my grandfather Salamon, that's my maternal grandfather, who had a tailor shop. He was a tailor, but he employed tailors and sold yard goods for men's suits. And I went to his shop and I saw him taking notes, and I saw his books, and it was in a weird language, script. And I said, "What is that?" And that's the only time I heard the word Ladino. He said, "That is Ladino," to me. And you will see the samples of that in a little while. Of course, they were both part of the Sephardic community. They were both observant, actually, as were, I think, all Jews, even in my time in Turkey. They spoke and lived in a world where their language was Ladino. There were many newspapers, and the handwriting I was telling you about is called soletreo, or Ladino. It's a brushy, you'll see examples. And they both could read the Ottoman script. You know what that was? Arabic, the Arabic script. The language was Turkish, but the script was Arabic. This is probably one of the newspapers that they read. It was published in Izmir. It was one of the earliest papers in Ladino. It's called La Buena Esperanza. And if you notice, I think this is interesting, that the titles were always in what we know as Hebrew, but the text was in the Russian Hebrew letters, which is a variation that I can talk about in another lecture. During that time, there were at least 5 journals, 5 periodicals in Turkey. And this is a page from a school book for children, and again, teaching both the square, regular Hebrew, and the Rashi Hebrew letters. If you're interested, that's a very interesting subject. And this is the kind of script that my grandfather wrote in. This was actually written by a friend of mine who was a Holocaust survivor from Salonika, from today's Thessaloniki in Greece. And note in my translation of what he wrote, he said, I was born in Salonika, of course, in Ladino. I can read it to you in Ladino, maybe I should do that. Yo nací en Salonique el 12 de octubre 1912, 2 semanas antes que los turcos liquidaron Salonique. I was born in Salonika the 12th of October, 1912, 2 weeks before the Turks left Salonika. If you remember, I mentioned the Balkan Wars when Salonika was lost. He was born 2 weeks before. He has, of course, since passed away. Now, they were similar and different. My grandfather, Samuel, what I know about him is that it was told to me by my father, of course. And he had a yeshiva, which meant he taught children. And and of course you saw his garb. He knew several languages. He sold insurance in Turkish villages. My father went along with him, that's how I know, he told me. And he had many Muslim friends. He was a French citizen because his grandparents had come from Bayonne in 1815. And how he adapted so quickly and really embraced the Ottoman lifestyle, to me is amazing. He had 6 children, and his wife died young, and one of my aunts had to stay home and take care of the children. My grandfather Salamon, whom I knew and loved actually, but I realized as I was preparing for this that I knew very little about him. All I knew is that he always looked elegant, and he wrote, like I said, in the Russian script. I don't think he ever learned the Latin alphabet. So he had a very hard time because he was an avid reader before. And when the alphabet reform happened in Turkey to this basically Latin alphabet, all of a sudden there were no more newspapers or just his old books to read. Maybe he learned the Latin alphabet a little bit, but not enough to really read it. Suddenly he became illiterate. He lived for 3 decades in the Turkish Republic, but in my view, he remained basically Ottoman, whereas my Amado grandfather, I think, would have adapted very well had he lived on. Oh, he changed his name from Al-Granati, which means hailing from Granada in Spain, to Al-Granti, because he had airs of being a la grande, as we say, more high class. Here is a wedding, and you can see I'm the little girl there, the flower girl. This is my youngest aunt's wedding, and behind me is my grandfather, and pretty much like I remember him. The rest, he eventually got a stroke. I don't know how we're doing with time. I'm trying to make it really fast. I want to tell you that according to the Sephardic tradition, My two brothers were named for each of those grandparents. And so as I prepared for this, I really felt grateful for the opportunity to remember them and to give this short homage to them. Thank you very much. Yes. I also want to give you this slide for a note of humor. I thought it was funny. Yes, I saw something.
So, hold questions until all three speakers have spoken, and if you can't wait, then enter it online, okay? That's how we're gonna do it this afternoon. Thank you so much, Rachel. And now, next is Sarah Carmen, who was born in Drama, Greece, and came to the United States when she was 3. Her parents are survivors of the Holocaust. They survived the intolerable existence in concentration camps for 3 years, but each lost almost every member of their family. They immigrated to the United States in 1951, wishing to give their young family a better life. Sarah's family settled in Portland, Oregon. She attended college in Portland, where she received her BA from Portland State University and an MA from Lewis and Clark College. It's a pleasure to welcome Sarah to the podium. I feel like I should be singing Jeopardy something. We're running like 7 programs simultaneously, and this is taxing the computer. Voila. First, yeah, and if you want to go on with the. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my memories. I was born in Drama, Greece, and if you look at the map, you'll see that Drama. If you look at the map, you'll see that Drama is on the Bulgarian border. Oh, wait, I think I changed something. I looked at the map.
Just.
There's Drama right here. It's in the Macedonia area of Greece, near the large city of Salonika. Salonika is the second largest city after Athens in Greece. And I came when I was very little. I was only 3 years old. My brother was 5. When I tell people that I'm from Greece, they assume that I'm Greek Orthodox. And they say, do you go to the Greek church? And I say, no, I'm Jewish, and my parents are Holocaust survivors. Many people are surprised to even know that there were Greeks that are Jews. or that Greece was invaded by Nazis during World War II. Salonika, the large city near Drama, prior to the Holocaust, was a thriving center of Jewish learning and Sephardic communities. It was known as the Jerusalem of the Balkans. More than 63,000 Greek Jews were killed in the Holocaust, which practically wiped out the Jews from Greece, killing 85% of the Jews. This is one of the highest percentages of all countries invaded by the Nazis. Before the war, my parents lived in Greece, in Drama, and Drama had a population of about 1,000 Jewish people. But many of the neighboring cities next to Drama were also populated by Jewish families, sometimes 800 people, maybe 1,000 people, it depends. My dad was from Sherry's. If you look where Drama is, there's a city called Sherry's right beside it. That's where my dad was born. There's another city called Zanti. It starts with an X, but it's pronounced the Z, Zanti. All those cities had Jewish people in them at one time. And now there's hardly a trace of any Jews living there. Ladino was a language that they spoke in their homes and with other members of the Jewish people in their Sephardic communities. When my parents decided to come to the United States, they came not knowing one word of English. Even though my parents knew several languages, communication in those first years of living in the US was a challenge. In the early 1950s, when I came, airline travel was not the norm. We traveled on an ocean liner, the USS Independence, that came to New York, and my sister was able to retrieve a manifest from that voyage, and it noted that our family was destined to go to New Haven, Connecticut. My family stayed in New York for the first few weeks after our arrival. And during that time, someone advised them to move to Portland, Oregon, where there was a Sephardic community, a Sephardic synagogue, and people who spoke a common language, Ladino. Well, my parents really didn't know where Portland, Oregon was. And when they said they want us to go to Portland, they thought, Portland, Maine, that's not far from New York. So we were on a train for many, many days from New York to Portland, Oregon. But when we got off the train, there was a member from the Sephardic synagogue waiting for us. And there was some other Jewish people waiting to help resettle immigrants. And the representative from the Sephardic synagogue spoke Ladino, so my parents already had someone that they could communicate with. My parents were able to fit in and adapt to this new community because they share this common culture and language with the Portland Sephardic community. Before long, my brother and I, and then my mom was pregnant with my sister on this voyage from Greece to the United States. And we were all enrolled in school, so there were 3 of us. My parents would continue to speak to us in Ladino or Greek, but we would always answer in English. They too wanted to learn English, but there was a strong presence of these languages in our home, more Ladino than Greek. We belonged to the only Sephardic synagogue in Portland, located at that time in South Portland. This was an area where other Jewish families lived. There were also 3 other synagogues in that area. That no longer is the case. This was back in the 50s. The Sephardic synagogue that I belonged to was called Ahava Vahim. It means brotherly love. They recently celebrated 100 years in Portland. Our sidurs, or prayer books, at our synagogue were Hebrew on both sides. No English that I remember. We didn't always have a rabbi, but we had a very knowledgeable very knowledgeable lay leaders in our congregation. During the holidays, the highest holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, a Hazan, or a cantor, named Jack Myman came from Seattle, Washington to lead our services. He had the most beautiful voice. My favorite part of the service was when he would sing the prayers in Ladino. Another favorite memory is prior to the Torah service, the aliyot, or honors, were auctioned. And the men, only men, would bid on receiving the honor of being called to the Torah and other honors associated with the Torah, including holding it, opening the ark, that type of thing. But all of it was done in Ladino. It was absolutely beautiful. And for children, it was so exciting to see who was going to bid what for, and who was going to finally win that honor. The social hall and kitchen were in the basement of the synagogue. We call it the kilah. I've learned that kilah is also a Hebrew word, but we would always say, we're not going to synagogue, we're going to la kilah. The woman would gather to bake and cook for every major event, bar mitzvahs, weddings, any other special holidays. And it was a great way to learn and perfect cooking and baking skills. They would learn from one another. This was long before we had YouTube and all these ways to learn to cook something that was difficult. They would gather, they would teach each other all their little secrets. How do you perfect to make the baretas? How do you perfect to make this bizcocho? How do you perfect to make a special comida, a special meal? My mom has always been a master baker and a skilled and gourmet cook. So our home was always filled with Sephardic delicacies. We had baretas, bizcochos, baklava, beautiful comidas, our meals, and countless other Sephardic foods. We were raised with beautiful words. Actually, I forgot to mention that the first couple of Ladino days that we had here at SMU, my mom baked for the group. One year she made baretas, another year she made bizcochos. And if you were here for those, it was my mom's beautiful handwork that made these. She had bendichos manos, blessed hands. Actually, it means more than that because she did everything with such love. It was beautiful. We are raised with the most lovely words of endearment. Preciado, precious. Querido, my dear. Tesoro, my treasure. This is how I was taught to my parents. And blessings in every single conversation. El Dios que te guarde. May God protect you. You know, in monkeys, may I never be without you. And blessings every time we talked. My mom was very spiritual. She was a very religious woman. When she talked, she would say, El Dios que te guarde. May God protect you. You know, in monkeys, may I never be without you. And praising God. She would finish her sentence. Something good would happen. She would say, Glorious al Dios. She would praise God. Bendicho Dios. Kind of like we say, Baruch Hashem, blessed be our God. And Sil Dios quiere, God willing. These are soothing and comforting words that are truly unmatched. I'm not doing it justice in translating it to English. Because the words were spoken with our mouths, they came from the heart. Ladino is a language that's learned in the home. And there's an emotional connection, unlike any other language I know. I also find that I feel a bond and kinship with others who share this language and this culture. Thank you so much for inviting me, Professor Cheryl Lander, who has organized this every year that she's been here, and my Canadian friend, Rachel, who is an inspiration, who does so much to keep Ladino alive. And Alex, who I recently met, is such a giving person, and his wife Dory, they just took action immediately and really helped to organize this, so I thank them all.
Well, we were gonna tweak your hearts as well as your minds. Our next presenter. Our next presenter, Martin Rios, was born in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico, a region known for its popularity of partial Sephardic and Verso ancestry, since it was founded by Luis Caravalla y La Cueva in 1581. Mr. Rios is passionate about the history of this region, and through his genealogical research has uncovered several lineages of Converso ancestry associated with its early settlers. His current research focuses on tracing an unbroken maternal lineage of Converso origin, which spans from 15th century Sevilla, Spain, to 21st century northeastern Mexico and South Texas. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess the first thing I'll mention is that I'm pretty averse to social media, so I'm not ready to become a Facebook or YouTube star yet, so no pictures, video, or anything of that sort. I would appreciate that. Let me just go back. I'm here to talk to you about Spanish citizenship for people of Sephardic ancestry. The first thing I have to mention on that subject is that this doesn't really have any relation to Ladino, but I am here because my very good friend Rachel asked me to, and I can definitely see how there may be a tangential interest for people who have Sephardic ancestry in this subject. But I don't speak Ladino. The people, the region where I come from, we don't speak Ladino, and there's been some controversy as to the presence of Ladino in the region where I come from. And in this region, like my introduction mentioned, is Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. If you're familiar with the geography around Texas, it's sort of a state contiguous to Texas. This city, Monterrey, was founded in the 16th century by Luis Caravalla y La Cueva. Probably the year 1581. He was of Sephardic conversional ancestry. His whole family was persecuted by the Inquisition. He died in a jail in Mexico City after being persecuted by the Inquisition, and his whole family was more or less also. But I don't descend from him, but a number of families of Sephardic conversional ancestry did settle also along with him in this region. And many people like me who come from this region trace their ancestry to those people. Like Mexicans, I am a mestizo. Like many Mexicans, I am a mestizo. I'm proud of my multi-ethnic heritage. I have indigenous Mexican ancestry. I have Spanish ancestry. I even have African ancestry. But in this region, we have a segment of Sephardic conversion ancestry. And that is the ancestry that allows us to apply for this type of citizenship. Now, usually the first thing that people ask me when I talk about Spanish citizenship is why would you Why do you want to do that? I'm already a U.S. citizen. I'm already a Mexican citizen. What's the deal? Why do you need that? Most people just do it for sentimental reasons. You want to feel attached to Spain in some reason or another. For people who have been who speak Ladino, there's that sentimental aspect of it. There's also a more practical one, depending on your age. If you're on the older side, you probably might want to retire in Europe one day. If you're on the younger side, you probably want to work or live in Europe at some point. If you get Spanish citizenship, you of course have access to those 28 member countries. Let's see. Our previous two presentations from Rochelle and Sarah had to do with Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Spain and who went to Greece and Turkey, right? But there are other Jews who stayed in Spain and converted, like my ancestors. And so when I say converso, I mean I am a descendant of a Jew who converted in Spain at some point and has been Catholic for over centuries. There's a lot of terminology associated with conversos. Maybe most of you have heard the term crypto Jew. That's a bit of a controversial term because it sort of implies a religious observance. In my case, my family didn't have a religious observance of Judaism, but we knew that from the region we came from, we had that ancestry, at least partially. So through doing a lot of genealogical research, you're able to uncover and trace back that ancestry. Just to give you an idea of what I had to do to get Spanish citizenship, if you've done a little bit of genealogy, you know how many ancestors you have. At the top of this pyramid, you start with yourself, you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and by the 10th generation, you have 1,024 parents, right? So you have a lot of ancestors. So starting to do this research, especially when you have a multi-ethnic heritage like most mestizos, it can be a little daunting, right? But nevertheless, I already had some guidance from DNA testing as to where to look. And just to give you an idea how far I had to go back, I had to document my genealogy about 15 and 20 generations for most of us who do this type of research for Spanish citizenship. So if you can see that graph, you can see that the year 1492 sort of falls around the 20th generation. Now the year 1492, of course, is a very important year in Sephardic history because it's a year, of course, that Jews were expelled from Spain. In the case of Sarah's and Rachel's family, but it's also the year in which my ancestors had to convert. They were given the choice: if you want to remain in Spain, you have to convert. And so before the year, there were Jews in Spain. After 1492, there were no Jews in Spain. So our work, whenever we have to document our ancestry, is to document at least to that year or posterior years whenever one of our ancestors was persecuted by the Inquisition, which was the case for one of my ancestors, and that's why I was able to obtain Spanish citizenship. How do you obtain Spanish citizenship? There's an organization in Spain that certifies genealogies for this purpose. It's the Federation of Jewish Communities of Spain. A very important question a lot of people ask is, do I have to be Jewish to qualify? You don't have to be Jewish, but you have to prove your Sephardic ancestry genealogically speaking. And how many steps does this take? I usually joke with people, it's just 2 very simple steps. You just go online, you find this list of Sephardic surnames. Sephardic surnames such as Perez, Gonzalez. If you can think of a common Sephardic, a common Latin American last name, it's in that list. So if you find it, that's it, you're Sephardic. Then you just go make an appointment with the king, and the king gives you the reality is a bit different. It's not that easy. You have to prove your Sephardic origin, and like I said, it's not in a list. You actually have to do your genealogy. If you come from a normative Sephardic family, you've been Sephardic all these years, you belong to a Sephardic congregation, you just have to provide your link to that Sephardic congregation. However, if you come from a conversion background like myself, you actually have to do your genealogy, and that can be 100 years, 200 years, or all the way to 1492. Right? So you have to prove your Sephardic origin. Another thing you have to do is you have to provide a special connection to Spain. That can be in the form of membership to a Spanish organization. There may be some members here from Casa de España in Dallas, Fort. There you go, we have one. So if you're a member of Casa de España, that proves your link to Spain, special connection to Spain. That will be another requirement. And I'm going through these requirements, of course, very fast. I sort of adapted the presentation from like 1 hour to 15 minutes, so I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. But in addition to proving those links, you also have to take civics exams about Spanish, obviously Spanish culture. You also have to take a language exam, intermediate level of written and spoken Spanish. It can make it easier for people who are 70 years or older, but of course, the challenge is for many people who speak Ladino that there's definitely a struggle, right, to meet that gap between Ladino and modern Castilian, right, in which that exam is. So there is a bit of a barrier for a lot of people. Other requirements, just more what you would expect. You have to provide background checks, copies of your passport, etc. You file all of this online. Select Notario. Yeah, you keep calm because bureaucracy in Spain is crazy. So it's very important to keep calm. You go to Spain to sign your acta. They send you a letter. All this process probably took about a year for me. They sent you a letter notifying you of your citizenship. Oh, and this is the part where I actually show you my passport because I haven't actually used it for anything since I got it. So let's just show it for presentations. Like I met Rochelle for brunch, and she said, I think she almost said, I have a great idea for you to use your Spanish passport, right? You can show it to people because ever since I got it, I haven't been to Spain. So sometimes I do wonder why I got it, and I think I just got it for sentimental reasons. I just wanted to legitimize my conversion ancestry. I already knew I had it, I already knew the genealogy, but it's kind of nice to know that the country where my ancestors went through this ordeal is recognizing that ancestry. A big question with this process is how much does this cost? Maybe around $6,000. I didn't really keep track of how much money I spent for the entire process because it was a year long. But it just keeps into perspective that I put this map of how much it costs to get citizenship in other parts of the world. In the US, to get a green card, you have to invest $500,000. Right? So if it costs you $6,000 to get a citizenship in a European Union, which is comprised of 28 countries, it may not be that bad, right? Just putting things into perspective. Something very important to keep in mind is that this is, there's a timeline to this. If you want to do this, you have to apply by October the 1st of this year. Pretty much, if you're thinking about this right now, it's probably already too late, but I'm just here to teach you about it, tell you that it could have happened. No. I'm pretty sure if you start right now, you can do it, but you have, like I said, you have to take tests, Spanish test, civic test, and gather all this evidence. For many of you who belong to normative Sephardic congregations, it's a very much easier process. For those of us who come from our conversion ancestry, it's a much lengthier process because we have to do a lot of research into our genealogies. If you have any questions, this is the best website that I recommend. Is the Federation of Communities, Jewish Communities of Spain. They will answer most of your questions. Let's see what else. I think I did that at the time, thinking I put it in and out. Thank you very much.
And now we're gonna do the questions. So we've asked our presenters to come back up.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to say that, Martha's, presentation, I think, maybe you missed it or like I did. It's because of a law that, a recent law, 2015, that's being issued to, what's the word, to, it's for, no, to make up for the expulsion, you know, return. Yes, and Portugal too. So that's why now we are talking about it, because it's a new law that if you're descendant of foreign Jews, you can apply for this citizenship.
I think, yeah, I forgot the fundamental part of that.
Many people I know have gotten this citizenship, and my older son has applied for Portuguese.
Thank you, Rachel, for that clarification. I guess I just skipped the
Yeah.
first part. Yeah, this law was passed on October the 1st of 2015. It was supposed to last for 2 years, and they just extended it 1 more year. So they might extend it again, we don't know, but for now, we've been enjoying this law for 3 years. And it's great that the Spanish government did this to make amends, make amends for what they did to both our expelled ancestors and our ancestors who had to convert by force. And that's pretty much the reasoning behind this law. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take questions. Maybe we'll do one question from the audience, then a question that's already been posted. We'll go back and forth like that. So anyone who didn't get a chance to post electronically, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Did it occur to you when experience the second-class status of
Of course. The question is about dimitude. Dhimmi, D-I-H-M-I, is the word used for the so-called protected peoples under Islamic rule. That means that you are allowed freedom of religion and practice any way you want, so long as you know your place. Your place being second-class citizen, inferior to the Muslim. That means your synagogues cannot be higher than a mosque. Depending on the ruler, it changed. Sometimes no, but the ruler didn't care about any of this, and they were very free. Sometimes they really imposed the restrictions, like you couldn't wear a certain color if you were not a Muslim, specifically green, which is the Muslim religion, religious color, and so on. That word dhimmi is applies to all non-Muslims under Islamic rule, specifically under the Ottoman Turkish Empire.
Okay, our next question is from an online viewer. Did Ladino descend from Aramaic?
No.
Next question.
No, it descended from Spanish, no. Ladino is really medieval, pre-expulsion, Castilian based. But it has influence, of course, being Jews, even English has there is a Jewish English, right, that other people don't use. So the Spanish Jews had their own, mixing in Khalet and kippah and what, and Hanukkah and all those words, but other than that, it was whatever. Do I have time to give a little short history of how it evolved? When the Sephardic people arrived in the Ottoman Empire, and that was a very, very big area, which includes lots of countries today, they spoke the dialects of the Iberian dialects from which they came. including Portuguese, which is quite different. So it became sort of an amalgam of all these languages, plus the Hebrew that worked in, and plus with time a lot of Turkish that came in, and in later centuries even French and Italian that came in. But you can trace, like Aragonese words in our language from medieval Aragon, and sayings and so on. So it's really quite different from Spanish, but we get along just fine in Spanish also. We understand most everything except really complicated things.
Yeah, that was a great lesson. Another question from the audience. Okay, so we'll continue with the online viewer. Oh, right there.
Growing up with my family, my mother always had a picture of Carmen on the wall. And she even had it touched up and painted and everything. And in my family, my sister looked like she was from Cuba. I always thought I looked like I was from Mexico. And of a DNA, especially one organization that used to do your DNA, that you could recommend.
Don't know anything about the.
Well, I think you're talking about family tree DNA. The CEO is Bennett Greenspan, and I guess they're the most advanced when it comes to Jewish genetics. But of course, it's controversial because DNA and attaching it to ethnicity, it's still a pretty new science. So you have to match your genetics with your documentation, right? You have to do your genealogy that matches the genetics, you're good to go. But other than that, it's just some indication as to what your ethnicity.
The one that used has the biggest database.
Not the biggest one. The biggest database would be Ancestry DNA, around 10 million. And I think maybe Family Tree DNA is probably around 800,000. But they do have the most expertise in Jewish genetics. Family Tree DNA.
Thank you. Our next question, how have the Ladinos helped with the plight of Jewish people in the 21st century? Which one? I didn't ask the question, so I can't clarify. Are you the questioner?
If Izmir had a French alliance.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, the question is, did Izmir have the Alliance schools? All major cities in the Ottoman Empire had this a school from the Alliance Israélite Universelle, which was a French Jewish educational institution, and they established schools throughout the Ottoman Empire at the time when the educational situation was really in the hands of the rabbis and not keeping up with the modern world. So yes, most of our parents and grandparents were educated in Alliance schools or foreign language schools like the French Catholic schools and the German schools. We didn't have German, but French Catholic, yes, my mother went to one. But also Alliance.
Can you remind us what the Jewish population of Izmir was, Rachel?
Yes, it depends on when you're asking, but when at the time that I talked about, just before the emigration, one thing I didn't say is that during the Balkan, after the 1908, when the revolution, that is the so-called Young Turk Revolution, when non-Muslims were conscripted, a lot of Jewish people left, and most of the people, Sarah and I are relatively new immigrants, but in the 1900 to 1922, really, there was a large number of Sephardic immigrants from the Ottoman Empire to the Americas, both North and South, and to Europe also. They just left so that they wouldn't serve in the army because, like my uncle, if you went and not just Jews, I mean, anybody who went to war didn't come back in those days. So they didn't want to serve.
Yes,
Kind of a follow-up question. You said, I know growing up, people in the family, Jewish education, your mom's Jewish education always impressed me compared to female Jewish education other places where the woman was basically put in a home role. You talk about your mom's Jewish education.
even in drama Greece, which
That
was
was what the question was.
about education for women in those days. My mother also went to a French Alliance school in drama, and she learned to speak French, she learned to speak Hebrew and Greek. So she was multilingual, and actually, it's interesting because when she was in the Holocaust, you can imagine there were people that spoke many languages, and actually the people that were Sephardic had a disadvantage because Yiddish is very much like German. So when the Nazis would order the Sephardic people to do things they didn't understand, and often it was a detriment to them not to have a little background, a little bit of the ear for that type of language. But my mom did have a wonderful education, and things were not good in those early years when she was growing up, because she was just 19 when she entered, the Holocaust broke out and Greece was invaded. But what I do know about my mom's, she had an amazing memory, and whatever she learned stayed with her till the end of her life. Also, women back then did not work outside the home, and so even if they did have an education, they couldn't put it to use towards some type of profession. They did learn skills. They worked from their home. My mother's sister was a dressmaker. One made hats. She was a millionaire. And once my mom was being interviewed, and they said, "Oh, your sister was a millionaire?" Oh, a millionaire, someone who made hats. And another sister knew how to cut hair. All those skills that my mom learned from her home came into play as she was in the Holocaust. And actually, I'll be speaking about the Holocaust on Wednesday, thanks to my dear friend, Maria, who has invited me to speak at Lake Highlands High School. And there I'll be sharing more information about my family's story. But education was important, but not to the point that it would lead to a career or a profession.
Another question from online, what is the difference between conversos and crypto views?
Well, I think we should love it because it's a very controversial topic, right? I'm not an expert, obviously, on these matters, but for me, just converso is a more neutral term. And crypto Jew, like I said, is more loaded with a connotation of religious observance. There's a lot of people who make claims of having observed Jewish practices or traditions for centuries, since their ancestors converted. And then there's other people who simply say, like me, I had ancestors who at some point converted for whatever reason, and they stopped being Jewish for practicing purposes. So a converso to me is just simply somebody who converted, and we don't know what their religious attachments were after that conversion, as to a crypto Jew, somebody who was hidden and in hiding, observing certain traditions of Jewish law.
I just want to add a little something to that. I belong to the Society for Crypto-Jewish Studies, and like you say, there's always a discussion of what is what, but there is a tendency to have this romantic vision of, if you are a descendant of a converso, that somehow you look for signs that your people were really hidden Jews, and some of those signs may or may not be Jewish, actually.
Can you actually mention maybe Ladino in that context?
Oh, yes.
Name?
Oh, yes, many Hispanics, let's say, come to me and say, oh, my ancestors spoke Ladino. Well, what is Ladino? Ladino was formed in the Ottoman Empire as a language, as a Jewish language. Otherwise, it was whatever Iberian languages the people used to speak. So what they really mean is that if their families lived in isolated areas, they didn't keep up with the evolution of Spanish, they might have a few archaic Spanish words in their language, but that is no indication of Jewishness, as they would like to say.
Another audience question?
I have always suspected, and I'm sure you know, that when the Jews left in 1492, they didn't only go to the Ottoman Empire, the bulk did in the Mediterranean. But we have Jewish communities in the 11th century in France. We have we have communities in the Netherlands. I suspect even Eastern European Jews have a thread of that same group.
Very important.
But they don't suspect.
Yes, of course. Very important to know that, because in the 10th, 11th centuries, 80% of the Jews of the world lived in Iberia, in Spanish, Spain and Portugal. What happened to them all? How come this Ashkenazim are the overwhelming majority of the Jews in the world today? A lot of them, in fact, the 200,000 or so that left and they say arrived in the Ottoman Empire, is a minority of who lived there in Spain and Portugal and the whole peninsula. Some went to Morocco and they kept, or North Africa, let's say. But after converting, many left. I mentioned that my grandfather was from Bayonne in France. Where did they come from? They had gone to Bayonne in France from Spain after having converted, because they were conversos also. And then they went to where they could be free to practice Judaism, and they became Jews again. You mentioned Holland. The Holland community, known as the Portuguese, they were all former conversos. But, and most importantly, that what very few people know is that many Sephardic Jews went and joined Ashkenazi communities and became Ashkenazi. We have here the Ashkenazis. The last name itself tells you they are Ashkenazi, but all Ashkenazis are Sephardic Jews. Why? Because they came to the Ottoman Empire eventually and they became Sephardic, you know. And so it's all very mixed. It's not a direct line, as Martin mentioned. How many ancestors do you have if you go back to?
15.
No.
15 generations. Oh,
15 generations. How many people is that?
well, 10 generations, 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, imagine. So there is that DNA, if you want, Sephardic DNA in lots of Ashkenazi Jews as well.
Okay, another question. What is the current situation of Ladino? Is it a co-official language in Israel or Turkey?
No, it's not an official language anywhere. But as I mentioned, I want to say that the International Ladino Day in Istanbul will be next week. And it is the only place where this day is observed where everything is in Ladino. There are still enough people in Istanbul where the entire day they have all kinds of activities going on. Everything is in Ladino. There are enough people who at least understand the language there. And in Israel, it's mostly Greek.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. and both tables are equipped with caffeinated and decaf coffee, as well as sweets imported from a Brooklyn kosher Sephardic bakery, Mansura. So please enjoy, and we'll see you back here at 3:30 for the concert.
Organizando las cosas. Vamos con estos que están ahí.
Alex, pero ayúdame. No quiero dejar aquí la cámara.
Hi.
Hello.
Where are you from? Spain?
I'm from Spain.
Oh,
Yeah. That's why I have
¿De
this
qué
bird
parte de
that
España? ¿Sur? ¿Sevilla?
del noreste, de Zaragoza.
Oh,
Sí, de la parte del norte.
ok,
Yo llevo un tiempo fuera de España, la verdad.
ok. El acento te ha cambiado bastante.
Sí, sí, sí.
Nosotros somos de Argentina.
¿Son de Argentina?
Una comunidad judía. Es la más grande de Latinoamérica.
Sí. Sí, sí, no, históricamente los lazos de migración de Argentina fueron importantes. Sí. Pues bueno, a ver si...
Y hay muchos judíos que nacieron en España.
Sí, cierto.
Sobre todo en Barcelona.
Sí, las zonas de costeras, también en Galicia, también hay bastante comunidad importante. Es interesante, sí.
Okay.
Bueno, nos vemos ahora entonces en el café.
Am I my brother's keeper?
Yes. Yes.
That would keep me. Up the old town.
Yeah, we had to postpone that because of we can do it at the end.
Hi, how are you
You know what? I feel really good today.
Okay. That's all right,
Oh, there you go.
Who are you signing?
I don't know, I just saw, there's somebody that came by outside my field of vision, that's.
You're telling that your wife. What? Okay.
Well, I was gonna say she's the best person to talk to. No, because I actually want to develop, I've taught directors, but you know, directors. Yeah, I don't remember.
No, that's for no, the last part. Okay, can we do some sound checking? So we have 20 minutes. So let's get to no, we're not gonna have this. Michael's right there next to you.
Well, I thought the base.
Oh, fine. So Michael, on the end.
Sure. No, I mean, it's okay. I can get it.
You didn't have a light. I have to move that.
remember the names.
Hello, we are going to run a Yuna Yonas. Escalera de o.
I'll pick it up from my phone. You want that?
Have you been to Panama?
I don't have any safaris.
¿Funciona esto, quieres? Sí, guau, ¿qué tal?
¿Qué pasa? ¿Te tienes que ir pasando?
Sí.
Bébete un poquito de café.
No, no, Marisa.
Y cómete esto. Alex, pero cómete eso porque si no te...
Esto no va a sacar la boca.
¿Con el pollo? ¿Con el pollo?
Sí, me está deseando.
Ahí está igual sí que lo quiere.
Si vas a poder hacerlo, te va a Déjame la cara.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the pastries. It was just a question about where they came from. Mansoura Bakery in Brooklyn. That's if you want to order. They have an online order form, and they came, perfectly wrapped. It's just they said they would last for 2 weeks. So I really highly recommend it, and they're gone. So enjoy, and we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to let everyone out there know that we're going to be starting again, and I'll be back.
No, lo que que lo estaba.
So this afternoon's music is brought to you by Michelle Elney and friends. Michelle hails from a whole range of places: Austin, Fremont, California. She's going to spend a month in Brooklyn, Portland. She's from all over. Her ancestry is Sephardic Bayit Rock, and she grew up with her mother singing folk songs, which is how she developed an ear for this Sephardic music. And she'll introduce the band as we get going. So enjoy the concert.
y goce mi nombre, mi venganza. Venimos a ver, venimos a ver, y goce mi nombre, mi venganza. La novia no tiene dinero, la novia no tiene dinero. Queremos tener más bueno, queremos tener más alto. Venimos a ver, venimos a ver, y gozaremos en mi territorio. Venimos a ver, venimos a ver, y gozaremos en mi territorio. La novia no tiene contado, la novia no tiene contado. Queremos tener más alto, queremos tener más alto. Venimos a ver, venimos a ver, y goce mi nombre, mi canción. Venimos a ver, venimos a ver, y goce mi nombre, mi canción.
So please feel free on the choruses to sing along, and Shira so kindly put some of the songs up here so you can follow along. That was Scalarica de Oro. And Sephardic wedding song, and even if the bride doesn't have enough money, may they have tremendous fortune. And the next tune is called Siberia Shalarana, and the verses are in Ladino or Judeo Espanol, and the chorus is in Turkish. And I was told it was a children's song, kind of a true story. Did you ever see the frog sitting in the corner, sharing the fries with her sisters? I love you very much, the chorus. So let's try the chorus together. Ben Seni Severim, try that. Ben Seni Severim, Çok Seni Severim. Çok Seni Severim. Ben Seni Severim, Çok Seni Severim. Ben Seni Severim, Çok Seni Severim. So now you know how to say a very important phrase. All right. Yes, the choruses are in Turkish and the verses are in Ladino. Cabello sus buenas plumas, más delgadas de sus cabellos. Vencen y se ven, 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 vencen y se ven. Featuring our master percussionist on the dubek, this is Jamal. And Jonathan on the clarinet. We a warm invitation to Shira on violin. This next tune is called Los Católicos. It's one of those unrequited love songs. There's a popular prayer that's been put to this melody. This melody has appeared in many contexts, and different lyrics have been written in different languages to go with this beautiful melody. And this one is in Ladino, and Los Bilbilicos, the nightingales. La Rosa en Florencia is another name for it. Sufriendo del amor. It's time to it's time Michael Masuda on the oud and the phone. I just invite Isan Maturi back on stage. Isan Maturi. So this next tune is inspired by all the different music that I play. I started doing Sephardic music after one of my brothers brought me home a CD from Spain. He was traveling and in the barrio of Santa Cruz, in Sevilla, he found a little Sephardic center off the beaten path and brought me back a CD. And so that was the first song that I learned from it, Los Luticos. And that was when I was living in Santa Cruz. And this is a tune I wrote on a visit in Santa Cruz as well. And one of those things where I got a tune stuck in my head and had to write it and found different versions that start a similar way with words in Yiddish, a South American song, inspired all by the first few notes of this next song called Sailing Breeze Waltz. And basically the first three notes are the same in all these different songs, so now there's a Santa Cruz version. global DNA of the zone. Special hand for Shira Lander. Graciously playing violin as well as having a huge hand in putting this very special event together with other special people from Dallas. We're honored to be here sharing this music with you. This next tune is called Morenica, my little dark one, or it's kind of an endearing diminutive term of morena. And there's been a lot of versions of the song. It's crossed over a little bit into the jazz world to some extent. Some of you maybe know it from different worlds of music. example of a song that is not necessarily all in a literal translation. There's a lot of allusions to the divine and divine erotic poetry. And this next tune is a song celebration, intergenerational celebration called Las Casas de Boda. And we would love you to sing along to this one. And the words are "lai la lai." So, and the melody goes like this: lai 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 lai. All together. Lai 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 So it's about getting together, everyone's making the wedding houses beautiful, like getting beautiful for the special day, special Ladino and Sephardic day, for example. And So this next tune is another example of a song that has a chorus in Turkish, and the verses are in Ladino or Julio Español, and it's kind of like a light, somehow lighthearted, almost tongue-in-cheek love song. I was passing the front of your door and you were sitting, I would kiss that big rock on your door like kissing a beloved's cheek. And don't tell me that I never kissed you. You were mine so passionately. And so it goes on and on. And then the chorus is about the pink rose and how beautiful it is. So you guys feel free to join in. Aman, aman, you can beg. So let's try that together. Aman, aman, you can beg. You can beg. Never use a sende. Let's try that. Never use a. Never use a sende. So all together the whole chorus. Aman, aman, you can beg. You can beg. Never use a sende. Alright. So now you're learning to say all these warm, beautiful things in Turkish, so you can woo some Turkish friends. Okay.
Goya.
Hoyos presos tienes tú, por los amigos me muero. Cuando veo los verdes, que amor voy a mentir. So now for something completely different. We are country hopping a little bit. Over here, we're gonna do a Yemenite Shabbat song called Berorikra. And so we're bringing in a little of that area of the Sephardic, or sometimes referred to as Mizrahi, the Eastern diaspora music community for over several thousand years. finale. So, Esan Matori on the Santur. A lot of amazing projects here in Dallas, and we have a very special concert with the Urban Symphony, so look that up next weekend, and he can talk to you more about that after. We have Jonathan Jones on clarinet. Shira Lander, an amazing professor and musician here at SMU. Thank you for putting this together and having me. And we have Jamal, who's an amazing professor here at World Music Ensemble, the percussionist. Jeff Thomas on the bass, who I just met and Michael Masuda on the lead guitar. Please catch all of these wonderful musicians in your very own special town. And I'd like to invite a special guest, Laurel Ornish, to join us on song. So this next tune is called A la Una Yo Nací, and it, so it was sometimes known as the song of the hours because it goes through, it almost, each hour of the song represents a different life cycle, and it was based on an ancient text from early romances. And I'd love to teach you the chorus, so I would love you to sing along. Alma, vida y corazón. So, alma, vida y corazón. And soul, life, and heart. So this is kind of the everything song, which can cover a lot of important topics with this song. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A las tres yo mi amante, a las cuatro me casé. A las tres, yo y mi amante, a las cuatro, me casé. Alma, vida y corazón, alma, vida y corazón, alma, vida y corazón, alma, vida y corazón. ¿Dónde viene? Yo te quiero. your mom, your president, and and a very, very special thank you to our special guests from Ladino Day, and Alejandro and Dory, and to all the amazing speakers today, to Rachel Gordnick and to Sarah, who I'm looking forward to meet, and our other speaker who I had the pleasure of meeting yet, and to everybody that made this day possible. And I have CDs for sale, so please come out to me.
Next slide.
No, doesn't go there.
Keep going to the end.
And I have physical copies that we recorded in Spain several years ago with my band from Austin.
Oh, she has a business card.
And I even have business cards on the table and the mailing list, so next time we'll love us to keep in touch. And amazing, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Wonderful. For those who missed the second part of the program with Alejandro, we'll be doing that next year, so come back next year and you'll get the online game. All right. Travel safe, everyone, and enjoy.
Sí, yo tengo Alex, si quieres vamos por esa parte. Si quieres, sí,
Chicos, muchas gracias por venir, me han invitado a dar una charla de las clases de aquí de la universidad, de lo que no he dado aquí, así que bueno.
Oye, Alex, ¿cómo se llama el instrumento que toca? La misma varita. Alex, parece muy tesorito así vestido. Ropa de vestir, pantalón chiquito, zapatito.
porque que quería presentar, pero al final no podía.
Sí.
Vamos a trabajar. Vale. Vale.
You like this subject, you probably maybe check out DNA, so maybe we have a little bit of. Sure. Yeah, we may have gone. Thank you.
No sé si hacemos algo, pues lo vamos a hablar. Sí, bueno, sí. Entonces, a las 5 toca Fernando. Chicos, venga, gracias.
Si quieres puedes sacarlo y tener contactos, ¿sabes?
Esto está...
Si quieres puedes sacarlo y tener contactos, yo hago esto.
No, es que se ha quedado...
Estoy dentro, ¿no?
Sí.
tried to recently, I tried to arts classes.
Yeah, most of them have
When I got into the tenses,
But I just wanted to
the first person that comes back when you start present, I just wanted to leave the phone, so it makes it very hard to just a picture. Oh, so very good.
Yeah, of course. Very
Because the should be some sort oh, really?
That's why
Like a manhood, but it's really good.
Yeah, and also
Good to see you. Take care. See you later.
well, yeah. My grandfather, yeah, when I was there. That's right. That's why like sad. I didn't make up for it. I was with him, and then we had a very nice day, and
we're in a wedding, and really
well, 50, he was 53. I think he was from since 15 years ago. Yeah, so I really had time to share.
They really happy to see us together and everything we're doing there. So we're really happy to meet them, and we had a really good time. It was really cold, snowing. So I wanted to see like this, and we were in Zaragoza every year. We have done
You're outside.
Yes, I'm sure George from San Diego, so I'm interested. I've been to Portland. I think that, what it must have been like,
No, it's great. We're going to need the cart back at some point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
whenever,
sure.
and I know Shira's purse is down there.
Se la pagamos a.
Usted también recibieron flores.
Yo creo que sí.
Was it anywhere else on the west We know all of them, but that's how they, a lot of they come from Mexico too. It's very, we have more of everything, yeah, the mom, thank you, son, my God.
Qué bueno que todos se acuerdan más.
That's the kind of thing that culture, you know, the emotions yeah, we grew up in Dallas. We were 4 kids, and 2 of us are Texas. Well, I have almost left.
Bye, thank you.
Pero lo estaba sintiendo.
Pensando en ti.
One more thing before you leave. I saw you were taking notes. You want me to send you the slides so you can? If you were notating everything, right? Okay. I'll send you the slide. So that you can note it. I mean,
Oh, I took notes to where safe word. Yeah, well, that's fine. And I want hurry out.
Get set.
Right. Do you need help in anything?
No, todo está bien.
Oh,
Merci mucho.
estamos genio. En español.
Mandaré email para la documenta con la información, el video y todo.
Sobre todo cuando sale a YouTube, porque la gente ya sabe. What's the elephant lady I know?
Oh, I never had that word attached to me. Not that I know of.